Hello and welcome to the Antique Dust podcast. We have dusted down the podcast again, guys.
Ooh.
Super excited. So we are following on our LGBTQ and the rest of the alphabet plus theme, and we are looking at Queer as Folk. That is the UK version, which came out in 1999, compared to the Queer as Folk American version that came out a little later.
The following year.
So, as homosexuals,
speak for yourself on that matter.
Yeah, as homosexuals, this was a huge, groundbreaking show. It was sort of must watch. The UK, it was on at sort of, I think 10:30 at night, something like that.
Yeah, it was definitely post Watershed.
It was definitely post Watershed. There was a lot of hype around it. And I remember watching it and going, "Oh my god, that's just fantastic!"
That's shocking.
No, it was
shocking.
Brilliant. It was just so super delicious. I mean, the general storyline is it's a group of mates that live in the city. One of them, Gillen. So Aidan Gillen. So he was sort of a relative unknown actor. Been in a few bits and pieces, but this really made him a standout role, and it took him further. So he went and worked over in America with big shows like The Wire and Game of Thrones, and has done a variety of films and what have you.
I suspect Game of Thrones is probably what he's best known for.
Littlefinger.
No, Littlefinger. Yes. Peter Baelish.
So I've never watched Game of Thrones. It's a little bit too violent for me. But rampant gay sex, I'm all for it. Yay!
Well, there's a bit of that in Game of Thrones.
Well, yeah, but it's a bit bloodthirsty.
But usually ends in a death.
Yeah. Death on the mattress. It's not very nice.
No.
So the whole storyline starts with a young boy, first night out on the sort of gay strip, so it's set Canal Street in Manchester in the UK version,
and whatever it is in Pittsburgh for the US version.
And it's his first time out, and he encounters. So we'll refer to the English one first because that's the one that I'm more familiar with, and it sort of gets picked up by Stuart.
And they have a wild night.
They do have a wild night. 'Cause that same night, Stuart has fathered a sort of a child with a couple of lesbians. So he's been the sperm donor, and that child has arrived that night. And also he's sort of had a child. It's referenced in the.
So Nathan is 15 years old in the.
So it's 15. So one of the lesbians say, "So well, you both had a child the same night."
Yeah.
so it's a big dash and what have you. It shows the inexperience of the younger character Nathan, and where he's sort of talking about various positions and sexual things. He says, "Oh yeah, that's nice," and has no idea what he's talking about. But you had full-on sex, and it's just.
Let's just put context around that. We don't actually have full-on sex. I mean, up to bear in mind this was still 1999, so there was a limit to what could be shown. But there was what was indicated on screen went a lot further than pretty much anything that didn't have an X certificate and was shown in a specialist cinema. Yeah, and it was just the whole day, the whole night and early morning is just a catalogue of sort of amazing, sort of very salacious, drama-ridden, but comedy-ridden sort of scenes. You've got sort of Stuart meeting Nathan. You've got Stuart's friend, Vince, that is out with his other friend, and he's sort of like basically holds his handbag and drives his Jeep, because when Stuart gets a bit kye-eyed, he's sort of he gets his personal chauffeur. He's got his gay boy Jeep, which is lovely. I really wanted a gay boy Jeep. And you never got one?
I never got one.
Oh. But add that to the list of all the things that you never got.
And all the things I never got. But it was just a complete romp. It was joyous. There wasn't any of that. So with most drama series,
well, let's just hold our horses on the joyousness of it, because someone does actually die.
not in the first episode.
Are we only talking about the first episode?
Oh, so we're talking about the first episode.
Okay, I'll edit this bit out then, because I thought we were going to cover
Well, no, we'll cover the whole series, but the very first... I'm talking about the general first episode was just... It exploded onto the screen. You introduce these really fun, charismatic characters that are all flawed in their own way, but they've all got their strengths, but they're there. They've got a general camaraderie, which was just very, very lovely and very well executed. And it was very much a fact of life, because ultimately, from watching this show, I actually bought an apartment on Canal Street.
Can I just say that I think that probably our responses to the show were probably slightly different, though, because you were watching this, you're younger than me. By the time this came along, I was 30 years old. I was living in Aberdeen with a partner. This almost was this could have been as fantastical for me as watching Game of Thrones, for example. This never felt to me as if something that was ever within my grasp to live in that way, because I'd well past that way of living, long since given up on any of that by the time it came along. So I didn't have that same response to it that you did. I didn't say I didn't enjoy it, absolutely, but I enjoyed it as a piece of drama, not as an aspirational way of life.
For me, it was Stuart Alan Jones, the life, his apartment, his car, the way he interacted, the way he was. I just thought it was very unabashed, very unapologetic, and I really, really liked that. And that's what really sort of hit the notes for me. I'd socialised on Canal Street way before then. I was doing the gay nights on Thursdays in the Hacienda, and sort of been down Canal Street a few times, etc. But it wasn't. I didn't have that camaraderie with all of the mates and everything. So I automatically, for me personally, my triggers was move to the city centre, have the apartment, and
have the Jeep.
Well, I did go out and test drive a Jeep, and it was horrible. It was the most rancid thing to drive. It was so juddery. And as an estate agent, because I was a city centre estate agent, it just wasn't, it wouldn't work. So I had a black hot hatch instead, and I was zooming around Manchester in that. So, but yeah, I loved it, because when I did move to Manchester, I did have a collection of friends that hit all those notes. They're all flawed in their own way. They all converged on Canal Street. And I think at the time it was just like the last hurrah of that season of gays, because when I was a younger gay guy, sort of like teenager, going out, you could go to a bar and you could be chatting with either someone who's landed gentry or a scaffolder or a lawyer or a doctor, and they're all converged on one place. So it had like a social mobility, where now everything has become very metrosexual, and you've got the gays with money and the gays without money, and
never the twain shall meet.
And so you go to certain bars to pick up young boys. So if you want to have a bear, you go to sort of a bar that you can pick up a bear. So everything is pigeonholed now,
compartmentalized.
Yeah, where at that time it was like a big, fabulous,
it's a melting pot.
It was great, and I absolutely adored it.
Just toss things into the melting pot.
So, and it was a slice of life, and ended up being a slice of my life, which I loved, and I enjoyed city centre living, and I had, as a single gay guy when I first moved to Canal Street, loved it, absolutely loved it. There was drama. There's always drama. There's gay men. There's a whole collective for gay men. There's always drama. But going back to the drama that happens on Queer as Folk, there were only 30-minute episodes, but where the American one was longer.
Well, the episodes were longer.
The soundtrack went
for
really
80 odd episodes.
Yeah, the Queer as Folk American one, it took it further and it became a little bit soapy. But I quite like that because you had further development. The soundtrack was still pumping because the Queer as Folk UK one, absolutely cracking soundtrack. They had 2 series in the UK for Queer as Folk, and the first one was 6 episodes, and the second one was 2 slightly longer episodes. It just felt like they'd given up.
I don't think but apparently it seems that they didn't actually want to make the second series anyway, so it was a bit of a half-arsed.
It felt like that. There were some really cracking storylines that could have been explored over a slightly longer, but it was just like, and that was that.
Yeah, there was a story to tell, and I really respect that style of storytelling. We have a story to tell, we'll go in, we'll tell the story, and then we'll leave it at that. Whereas, yeah, if you enjoy the soapiness, if you enjoy the melodrama of the US version, the extended character arcs, the character development and so on, the politics, it's a very political show. In some respects, you could argue that they're just completely different shows. They have a common, like two, they're like, German and English. They 2 completely incomprehensible languages to each other, but they come from
the same base,
the common source. You could think of it like that they start off in a similar sort of way, but then go somewhere completely different.
I mean, the first series of Queer as Folk America pretty much followed the same beat for beat element that the UK one was done, but the UK one took it further. There was a situation where one of the characters, let's say in the UK one, picks up a guy in a bar, takes some drugs, and has a reaction. The guy runs and leaves him, and he dies. Same thing happens in the American one, but he goes to hospital and then he's recovered.
Yeah, so he doesn't die.
And spoilers, sweetie, that character arc goes through, and that the character that we're first introduced in series 1 is then resurrected a couple of points, and there's a conclusion with the end of that one in the end of that sort of that story arc. But what I really loved about the American one was it allowed people to breathe, and you got to know and love some of the characters because they did hit certain demographics. And so the main character was called Brian. Again, gorgeous apartment, gay boy Jeep. But you investigate a little bit more about family. Now, his parents, the UK one, there wasn't too much of a nastiness, but there was a bit of a nastiness with the American one, and it seems to be sort of a bad father, a sort of a disassociated mother, and so you get to know how Brian, the sort of the protagonist, actually became that person. But you've also got additional friends that are introduced, and they all have their time to have their storyline. So it does show various, like it was like one of the first age disparity relationships, which was done. It was like a pickle owner, the Prince of Pickles, has a fling with one of the characters, and that's got very amusing consequences and what have you. But I love both of them for different things. The UK one because it gave me a template of what I aspired to have and be for that period of time. The American one, bit of escapism. And I've made you sit through the American one a couple of times.
You have indeed.
What did you think of the American one?
So if we're looking at making a comparison, then you can definitely say that the production values are higher. There's more money spent on it. It's definitely glossier, shall we say. So that's on the positive. The negatives, I think it's well documented that it has a lack of diversity. There's very little representation of people of colour or lesbians. And the same argument can be levelled at the UK version as well.
I mean, there was another reboot of Queer as Folk. There was another Queer as Folk that was trial. I think it was 2 years ago, and it got axed after the first series, and that had every colour of the bloody rainbow. It just felt that they'd heard what people said, and they'd just overcompensated to such a huge degree. It was as though they were going through a tick list. We've got the transgender, you've got the mixed race, you've got, and it was.
I don't think we need to go through the tick list.
No.
We get where you're coming from.
But and also the stories. Again, it was trying to retell the original story, but it was getting too messy. Where it was a night that the concept was really good, and Russell T Davies, who created the UK one, went over to America and worked with the first series. Was there as an advisor, but his partner at the time, well, husband, now late husband, actually sort of was diagnosed with cancer, so he did actually have to come back to the UK. But he did very well, because in 2005 he rebooted Doctor Who.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways you could argue that it was the real kind of launching point for Russell T Davies' sort of stratospherical career. He obviously had been busy prior to that, but he definitely made a name for himself with that, and probably wouldn't have been able to do the things that he went on to do if it hadn't been for Queer as Folk.
Yeah, I mean, Queer as Folk really. I mean, he did. Russell T Davies went back. He was a script editor for what was it? Why Don't You, which was the children's magazine show, and also he was the writer of. There was a sort of a children's ward, and he also worked on Coronation Street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he has got a lot of references because he references the shows that he really loves. In the UK one, Vince, who's the sort of like the best mate to the main protagonist, Stuart, he is a complete Doctor Who fanatic. And there's a couple of scenes and there's a couple of references to Doctor Who in that element, and also there's references to Coronation Street, which for our American listeners, it's a soap opera. It's a sort of a slice of life in a northern town, so it's all a little bit sort of terraced houses and cobbled streets and everything's around the local pub, etc. I think it's gone a little bit more glossy now, but he referenced that within the show as well, where the American one, it was the protagonist, which is I can't remember his name, Brian's best mate, which was, I'm just checking the notes here.
Checking the copious
we
notes.
Do have
we do some research in this in this
so Brian's Brian's best mate was Michael. And basically he's a comic book nerd for superheroes, etc. And so he ends up in the series actually running a comic book shop, or owning a comic book shop, and also creating a comic book character with the Brian's love interest, which is Justin. Justin. So very, very good. But also the Queer as Folk one has a massive, massive superstar in it. So the person playing Michael's mother is Sharon Gless from Cagney and Lacey, and she just is a delight to watch, and it was so gorgeous. She's sassy. She's sort of protective gay mom, but protective gay mom for all of the gays. Or in the mother character in the UK one is also very protective, and she has she turns up in a variety of Russell T Davies's work, because he did another one following on from Queer as Folk called what was it, Cucumber Tofu Banana, which is the sort of the crossover of different ages, different sort of, but all within the same universe, and how their lives are are working, and
how lives intersect, I suppose you might say.
and she turns up in that as a throwback to Queer as Folk.
Yeah, playing the same character.
The same character, but as a ghost.
Yeah.
Which is really, really quite telling. But I say Russell T Davies, fantastic writer. He really, really gets it. I think both of them have really good qualities. The American one I really love, as in it's one of those places. It's a show where you can flick on and it's one of those Sunday afternoon ones. I know it's got a bit of gratuitous gay sex, but it's one of those ones where it gives you a warm, comforting hug because it's all very
perfect for a Sunday afternoon, just before Songs of Praise. Just a bit of gratuitous gay sex.
But the thing is, in the American one, I think they had sort of a certain quota of gay sex, but then after that it sort of went on. But it was mainly Brian, wasn't it? He was like the sex god.
Yeah.
And in the UK one, it was.
Well, I think alpha male is the term you would use these days that you would probably.
So I say that they're both very, very good. I wish the Queer as Folk UK one had a better second series. And I think
I would
not happen.
That it didn't have one at all.
Yeah, because the second series ended up in some sort of sci-fi ending.
No, not sci-fi.
It was. The Jeep took off like Back to the Future.
Yeah, but
and ended up in Nevada desert.
That's magical. I would say that's magical realism rather than sci-fi. They weren't beamed up by aliens and probed.
No, but we did say it was a beat for beat, and it was the original, the UK one with the American one, but then the American one, I enjoyed the development of those characters, and there were some bonkers storylines. Like one of them sets up a sort of a gay studio, it's like an OnlyFans, probably inspiration for OnlyFans, and sets up a business of that nature.
It's like a webcam.
A webcam
erotica,
website.
Yeah.
What was there? One of them goes off the rails on methamphetamines or whatever, and then comes back and goes through rehab and stuff like that. And then there's a gay bashing, which actually the gay bashing I think took place in season 1 of the American one, because the young character Justin sort of ends up going to his sort of ball or whatever, or his prom, and Brian turns up and has a dance with him as his date, and then one of the guys in the school beats him. And it ends with sort of a big thing, and it was like a bit of a cliffhanger. I'm sure that's the end of series 1, which was quite interesting. But overall, I think Queer as Folk, it was brilliant for its time. It's
groundbreaking and controversial.
The UK one really does stand up. And the good thing about it is most gay dramas is always those like bury your gays, or one of them has HIV, and it's all moral. There was no mention of that. Only that it was protective sex. It was the same thing with the UK, the American one, because there was evidence in there with regards to safe sex and all that sort of thing. But it was done in a very good way with regards to Brian being very sort of like, no, you've got to be careful yourself. Don't trust anybody. And that was his way. Just protect yourself, which I thought was brilliant. And I think the American one probably went on for a little bit longer than it should have. But the UK one, I think personally, so if it was going to have a second series, it should have been a 6-episode run as the first one went on. But it just felt like it was being rushed out, and it wasn't really.
I don't think the heart was in it. Really.
No. But I think the story had been told, and I think that was he wanted to go on to something else.
Yeah.
But
and I think there always probably will be a pressure to follow up on something that's been successful.
But it did make it Queer as Folk a water cooler type of show, and also for young.
I think it depends where you
you were.
Certainly, it wasn't for me, it wasn't a water cooler show in the sense that I didn't go to work the next day. Did you see all that gratuitous gay sex? No, that was never something that
Maybe that was just me then.
I think that probably was just you.
But I think, so with a lot of older gays would have said Armistead Maupin was their touchstone, and I think a lot of younger gays would say Queer as Folk was their touchstone.
Yeah, and I would go slightly further than that, because I think the UK version touched a wider audience than just gays of whatever age they might happen to have been at that time, because I had a colleague, and I remember once and she was a lot younger than me, and I gave her a lift somewhere, and I was talking about Canal Street because I was just either moved or just at the point of moving to Canal Street, and she was telling me how she and her mum loved Queer as Folk, and they made it was like almost like a girly night for them. They'd like get snacks and they'd sit down and they'd watch Queer as Folk. So I think it brought some aspects, maybe not necessarily very realistic aspects, but bring some aspects of the LGBTQ plus experience to a wider audience. Or essentially, I guess you would probably want to narrow that down. It brought more or less a particular style of gay man's experience. Because again, there's a criticism there about lack of diversity, but you just have to take it as it was, as a piece of history.
It is, and I think it is a snapshot, because I lived that life, and that life was was waning out when I was leaving Canal Street, but it was still very, very sort of there, and it was very true. And I had so for me, the soundtrack was brilliant, and it had a double album soundtrack for the first series, and people getting ready for a night out, they'd put the Queer as Folk soundtrack on because it was such an upbeat, joyful experience, and you could get a buzz on having that on before you went out and had a good night out with your mates. And so every time I listen to that soundtrack, I've got it on
on your iPod.
I did have it on my iPod. I've got it on my phone on my sort of iTunes.
About having your Sony Walkman.
Oh, God, I just love my Sony Walkman. The Discman I could never really get to grips with because it always skipped. Always very disappointed.
Well, that's because you were always skipping.
I was sashaying, Speedy.
You made it skip.
Yeah, but I also, with Queer as Folk, I had Andy Devine, and I went to an actor's studio, and Andy Devine was my acting teacher. So he was the housemate for Vince's mum. And then he went on to play Shadrach in
So he has more or less, he has the first substantial bit of dialogue in the first episode.
So they're mincing queers, all the tossers and
language, Timothy.
But it was very much, it was just like saying, well, they're all horrible.
Yeah.
Take your pick. They're all the same, which in fairness at the time it was the same. It was a nice slice of life, and I loved it. So, dear listeners, you've heard us witter on with our little sort of anecdotes of Queer as Folk. What do you think? Did you like it? What's your favourite track on the Queer as Folk? Was it disc 1 or disc 2? Anyway, do inbox us. You can find us on all social media platforms at Antique Dust. And until the next time, farewell from me, Jonathan.
And goodbye from me, Rob.
Bye-bye.
Bye.